Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a fantastic day. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about games. I said video games. I think the title and the thumbnail say video games, but I might expand that to include like tabletop games because there's some really important points that I want to make about those formats because they're basically the same points that I would make about video games. So I'm going to roll them all together. Because there's a couple of things people have to keep in mind about the gaming medium as a storytelling medium. So first of all, games do not have to have a story. And in fact, a game cannot be good without good gameplay. But it can be good without a story at all. Right? What's the story of Pac-Man? It's like, there's no story. You just play the game, right? There can be an extremely hazy story like Donkey Kong. Well, you have to save this person from a gorilla. That's just framing the gameplay. So most games don't need a story, and to the extent that they have a story, it's really just as a way to frame the game, or in a lot of cases, just to move the player through the various set pieces of the game. So if you're playing Super Meat Boy, what's the goal? It's to win, right? But it's to rescue Bandage Girl. And you're chasing Dr. Fetus, and the whole point is to just move Meat Boy through various set pieces to show him new challenges. It's really all about the gameplay versus the story, right? The story is just there to frame the game and allow the game to exist. So yes, you're going through like some ruined area. It's just, that's the art style for that area, and the level design for that area kind of goes with it, so the story frames it, right? So you have a couple little animated cutscenes that kind of pull the whole thing together. There doesn't need to be a lot of story for something such as Super Meat Boy. There doesn't need to be a lot of story with something like Super Mario Bros, right? The original Super Mario Bros. Go rescue the princess. How do you do that? You run to the right. That's how you rescue the princess. So games do not have to have stories. What's the story of Super Hexagon? Of Tetris, right? You don't need a story to have a game. You do have to have gameplay. And so this is where I'm going to make a complaint about a lot of modern games, which is they are trying to tell a story almost in rebellion against the medium known as video games. So they will attempt to add gameplay to a story. There's numerous examples of this. The big ones are going to be things like some of the newer God of War games, maybe. One there that people were talking about on Twitter called The Order 1886. This is a PS4 game with about 6 hours of gameplay that really probably should have just been an animated movie. I think it's okay to have movies, and honestly, when you're going to have a budget for a game that's like $100 million and it's not going to have gameplay, you might as well just make it a movie, right? It doesn't need to be a game. But because you could sell a game for $70, for instance, it's attractive to make a game. If you can get a lot of people to buy a $70 game, there's probably a bigger margin on that than a movie, right? Where you have to sell a $10 or $15 ticket many times over with lots of other expenses, including like physical copies of the media, and then of course the overhead of the movie theaters, whereas games have none of that. You can just sell a game for $70. So maybe from a corporate perspective, there's an attractiveness to making basically a low gameplay game. There are low gameplay games though that are really low budget. If you guys have ever played a visual novel, and I keep toying with the idea of making one, but I have so many other book projects that I really have to wrap up before I can like mentally commit to doing something in a new medium with a new style. I've done visual novels. I'm not sure if you say you play them or you experience them or you read them, whatever, right? So a visual novel is gameplay light, but it's really a presentation of a story. It's a specific kind of story medium that we associate with games. And there might be like choose your own adventure stuff with the story, choosing different story paths, making small decisions, or just a little bit more interactive experience of a manga or comic kind of story. Visual novels are a great format. They get bound up with games, and I wish more people who were wanting, quote, cinematic gaming experiences would just watch a movie, and play a visual novel. If you want a really off-the-wall story, visual novels have a lot of creativity that's going on in them right now. So you don't have to have a really heavy gameplay game in order to have a story, but if you're going to do that, like, it has to be so good that people aren't going to mind that it doesn't have a lot of gameplay, or it has to be like a visual novel where the user base just doesn't really expect a lot of gameplay. They want the story and they're used to a certain story presentation, and you're just adhering to those expectations. So yeah, I think the mistake a lot of modern AAA companies make is attempting to tell a story through a medium where the story is optional, and then doing, I guess, a bad job of it. So I want to talk about a couple of problems with telling stories through games. And even before I get to that, there's one big point I want to make, and this is related to tabletop RPGs. So I heard somebody, and I've seen this many times, and someone even put it in a comment to one of my videos a while back, is that Dungeons and Dragons is a collective storytelling experience. I'm like, no. Dungeons and Dragons is a game, and you play the game. It's not a collective storytelling experience. But the Dungeons and Dragons, and really the tabletop RPG medium as a whole, has been so infested by attempts to tell stories in that format that modern players, unless they're aware of the history of gaming, really really misunderstand what the medium's capable of and what it was originally used for, right? And the stories that used to emerge for tabletop RPGs are emergent stories, and emergent stories are really important. I could do a whole video just on emergent stories. But if you just get out Advanced Dungeons and Dragons and you use the tables in the back, you randomly generate dungeons and worlds, there's no campaign story. There's no module story, which was something that started to get really popular in the 80s. There's none of that stuff that modern D&D players associate with D&D, where they are playing through a story. And the dungeon master then has to railroad everybody through the various beats of the story that's written. They want to attack the shopkeeper, and you can't do that because the shopkeeper needs to give him the quest. So you just be like, you can't attack him. Just don't do that, right? In a video game, you can put those walls up really easily and players object to them less. But in a tabletop game where there's a rule set and then it's like, we're going to add a rule that you can't do that right now because I need to tell this story here. It disrupts the format of the game. But what used to happen is you would just play the game, and what would emerge from it would be the story. The story emerges from the players interacting with each other and the choices they make as they play the game. You know, Harryfoot, the halfling bard, makes a stupid mistake. He rolls a 1, a thunderstone drops, everybody goes deaf. They don't hear the goblins coming. The goblins come and attack. The wizard is impaled. Someone's, all of these, the actions that the monsters do and the players' reaction to them, and the actions that the players choose and the way that they choose to play the game. That's what emerges as the story in an RPG. So there's an emergent quality to stories when you're playing games that cannot be scripted and are not only are not up to you as the storyteller, whether it's a video game or a tabletop RPG, you don't want them to be up to you, because that spoils the uniqueness of the experience. That emergent story, the emergent gameplay too, that is an experience which, if you script it, it will destroy the quality of that experience. So no, you play games, it's not a collective storytelling experience. The story emerges from you playing the game, rather. Now, there's also emergent stories in things like MMOs, and this is one of the things that I really miss about, for instance, Classic WoW, but not just Classic WoW, but like any old school MMO, whether it's EverQuest. Final Fantasy XI probably has this, but I didn't really play it. Or like Dark Age of Camelot or something like that, is that the player story, there's a story about players interacting with each other, right? That kind of second life from which a story emerges, just like how you have a real story. So people will tell stories about World of Warcraft, like, well, we were in Booty Bay, and this person came, and they found a spot on the roof where they could shoot us with arrows, and if we hit him with a spell, the guards would attack us. So we jumped into the water, and the guards de-aggroed, and then he attacked me, and I attacked him back, and the guards stopped attacking him and started attacking me because his faction level was higher than my. These kinds of stories that we tell about what we did in the game. That's the emergent quality of storytelling in games. And that only happens when you have a game that's set up for it. If you have like a single player game, obviously there's not really an emergent story that comes out, or to the degree that it comes out, it's probably really low. Even in something like Morrowind, what's the emergent story of your character? It's mostly like you telling your friend that you found a cool item, or like, I found this sunken Viking ship in Morrowind. Like, well, that's really cool. It's not really a story. It's more just like you're communicating an experience to another person. Whereas there is a story with characters and rivalries and stuff in Vanilla WoW, because you had factions and you had all these unscripted encounters that happened between players where someone was attacking you. Like, I remember I was getting attacked outside the Yeti cave. And then I was getting wrecked because it was a paladin and he was higher level than me and I was a warrior. And then I leveled. Just as I was at 5% health, I killed the Yeti that had aggroed on me, and I leveled. I got full health, I was able to kill the paladin. All right. So that's a story, right? There's characters, there's me, there's a paladin, there's a danger involved. I didn't want to die. There's a location, there's a setting. The Yeti cave in, over by Tower and Mill in World of Warcraft. And then a result. There's a conflict and a resolution. He attacked me because he wanted a PvP kill, and he got killed, and that was really satisfying to turn that around, right? Like, the joy of that experience can't be replicated with a script. So if you're going with a scripted game, which is going to be, most video games are going to be scripted to the extent that the story beats are, whereas the gameplay obviously has to be left up to the player. You need to approach it like a storyteller would. And so I'll give you a couple pieces of advice for how to incorporate that into video games based on my experience as well as what I've observed. Okay. Before I get into that, with that whole diatribe on the emergent quality of stories, let me look at the chat real quick and see if there's anything I missed. I had an emergent kind of story like that in Final Fantasy XIV. I was a tank and my friend the healer. It was the Garuda fight. Yes, I know that one. The DPS kept going down, so me and my friend had to keep running around like crazy. He kept reviving the DPS, but he couldn't heal them fast enough from the ADD damage, or the ad damage. So we just kept fighting until I'm about to die and finally beat Garuda. It was crazy. What's up, Billy Fighter? Yeah, there's always things like that. It's like all the healers die. And then the tank somehow lives long enough, and then he dies, and the boss is going around killing the DPS. But there's enough dots on the boss that the dots kill the boss, and there's like one person left. And then he ninjas the loot. This is something that used to happen in World of Warcraft. The last guy standing ninjas the loot and Hearthstone's Hearth's out of the raid. Things like that happen. So those are these great emergent stories. So I'm talking about writing for games, yes. So here's a couple things. I will give you some negative experiences. I already complained a little bit about the AAA focus on it's a story, it's a cinematic experience, and that's actually a mistake. You really want to focus on gameplay. The truth is, players will put up with a bad story if the game is fun. They will not put up with a bad game if they like the story. If the game is not fun to play, they'll turn it off no matter how they feel about the story. And I'm not gonna. I don't want to give any specific names because I don't want to disparage anybody. But there's a game I'm thinking of that basically did that. They put all of their resources into this story idea they had, and then the game shipped, and the game just wasn't fun, and it was full of bugs. So people didn't really get to experience the story that they. They didn't really get to experience the story that the devs had put all this time into making because they weren't having fun playing the game. So the gameplay is number one. The gameplay's really got to be good in the game before you really think about story. And like I said, for most games, the story is really about moving the player through various set pieces and various areas of the game with new art and new gameplay mechanics and new challenges for them to overcome, more than it is about the way you would structure like a play with this many acts and these kinds of events. You can put those things into a game, but they're not going to occur in the same way that they are going to occur in a movie. Because a movie, for instance, a movie is a great example of this because being totally passive, the way the audience experiences the beats of the movie is completely up to the filmmaker. The movie's 2 hours. It has a very specific pace. Events are happening in time at a really specific pace. Lines are being delivered in a certain way at a very specific pace in order to arrive at the total running time of the movie. The audience is completely out of control of that pacing. Whereas with the book, you can read faster, you can read slower, you can skip sections, you can really have a lot of control over how you experience reading a book. It's one of the reasons I love books is like, I can read them fast or slow, or I can really stop and take my time. I can stop and think about a passage, close the book and think. I can read a passage and think, I think I remember something from earlier in the book. Go back and flip to another page and read that. And it's another reason why I don't like ebooks, because I just don't. I like the options that you have with a physical book, where you can pick it up and you can read it and stop and think and go back and look, or look ahead, right? Like all the things that you can do with a physical, real book, you can't do as well with an ebook. Just you can do them, but it's much more cumbersome than with a real book. So I prefer real books. So yeah, if you are making a game, trying to enforce upon the game a structured narrative like you would get from a play or a movie is probably a mistake, because you don't have control over that pacing. You don't have control over how the player's really going to experience those. The best you can do is to have a rough outline of that, and then maybe do cutscenes that are going to give you the big story chunks. If you're doing something like a JRPG, you might have like a lot of characters the person can talk to, but you're going to want to have some mandatory cutscenes that will make sure the player knows what's going on. Like, you can understand the story of Final Fantasy VI without talking to any NPCs. But a lot of people will stop and talk to them and explore the world. It's about their experience with the world, is my point. So, especially with an RPG, even though we think of RPGs as being story heavy often, it's really about the character interacting with a world and a set of systems more than it is about them interacting with the story per se. And that doesn't mean that you can't tell great stories with video games, and some of the people's favorite stories are told through video games. That's absolutely true. If you're using the medium well, you're going to use aspects of that medium. They're going to enhance the story experience. And I'll give you a couple of really good examples. So one of my favorites is the original Mass Effect. I'm not as big a fan of Mass Effect 2 and 3, mostly for gameplay reasons, a little bit for story reasons. Mass Effect 2 is just a series of character stories. It's like a collection of short stories with like a big mission at the end. It's not a terrible game, but I don't like the gameplay as much as Mass Effect 1. And there's no kind of overarching story that pulls everything together very well, so it's just not as good. But Mass Effect 1's good because there's little things that you can change, and they give the player the option to make decisions. Now, do these decisions actually change the story? The answer is no, they don't. It's part of BioWare's what I call the illusion of choice. So you can be a paragon or you can be a renegade. The choices that you make in dialogue, there's a gamification to them. You feel like you're getting something for them. It's even better in KOTOR, actually. KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic, is probably a better one because you get special powers once you're a Jedi. You can get dark side powers or you can get light side powers, depending on what decisions you make with the dialogue. So there is a gameplay element to you making choices. But as you play Mass Effect, more choices get open to you if you go Renegade, and different choices get open to you if you go Paragon. At the end of the day, they don't matter that much. The Sovereign is going to teleport into the Citadel, and you're going to have to fight him no matter what. The final stages are always the same. There is one really cool touch, though, which is that if you are like full Renegade, you can convince, I think it's whatever the bad guy is. It's not Garrus is the good guy, but I thought it sounded like Garrus, like Saris. Anyway, you can convince him to shoot himself in the head. You can convince him to commit suicide. Now, this only skips the first phase of the boss fight. No matter what, you're fighting him in phase 2. But it's just a great touch. It affects the gameplay. It feels like I made these decisions and I got something for it. I affected the story somehow. And I think I think all the things that I talk about are some of the reasons, I guess, why Mass Effect 3 ended up being so poorly received? There's multiple reasons, but one of the big ones is that people felt like all their decisions they made in the previous games didn't make a difference in Mass Effect 3. And the truth is, they didn't make a difference in Mass Effect 1, and they didn't make a difference in Mass Effect 2. Now, if you go fight the Reapers earlier, or the Collectors earlier in Mass Effect 2, your yeoman that you've had dinner with won't die. And if you go later, she will die. But it actually doesn't change the outcome of the story at all, because you don't really do anything with her after the conclusion of the story. It's just like a moment where your decisions appear to have changed something. Another good example is another BioWare game, Dragon Age Origins, one of my favorite RPGs of all time. In that, you can make a lot of decisions that in the story area seem big and will change the outcome of the story area, but for the overarching story, doesn't change anything. You can side with the werewolves against the elves. This is cool, I did this. And you can run into the elf village and slaughter the elves with the werewolves. And then the werewolves will be on your side in the last level. Does it matter whether the werewolves or the elves are on your side? It doesn't matter. It has no effect. No matter what, you're fighting the archdemon at the end. Doesn't matter. The levels are all the same. There'll be werewolves that run across to kill Darkspawn instead of elves. Similarly, with decisions you make, you can actually let, like, what castle was it? There's a castle that's getting attacked by zombies. You can actually let them die by leaving. There's really cool things like that, but no matter what, the story's still going in the same direction. But all of those moments have an effect that have changed the story experience for the player. A plot point is different. They made a different decision. The ending isn't different, but the way you get there feels very different. And in some cases, you can get like a little bit different ending where, like, you marry what's his name's widow. You marry the king's widow and things like that. There's lots of little options for how you experience the story that change a lot with Dragon Age Origins. But the big stuff is the same. And so they were really clever in doing that. The origin is the same. Each area that you go to is like a separate little encapsulated story with basically the same outcomes, although they may be somewhat binary depending on how you do them, right? Like, you could side with Ogren's wife, or you could side with the golem. And maybe Ogren doesn't like you if you side against his wife. It's kind of whatever, right? So little things that make it feel like you're having a different experience, even though the story's playing out pretty much the same way, no matter which way you play it, right? So it's a really good example of that. Another example of stories in games that I would really probably kind of hold up as an example are most of especially the classic Final Fantasy games. These are games that just have a straight up narrative. They have a beginning, a middle, an end. They have an exposition. They have a midsection. They have, like, final battles where you lose, and then they have final battles where you win. Right? It has a certain structure to it that matches the medium perfectly, provides a really satisfying experience for the player, and will tell a good story with likable characters. Now, here's the things that are going to be the same in games just like in other medium. Setting, characters, plot. Now, how you go about letting the player experience those is different in games, depending on what kind of game you want to make. And there's a lot of different kinds of games. But you're still going to have setting, characters, and plot. So with a Final Fantasy game, if you look at Final Fantasy IV, right, there's the world of Final Fantasy IV. There's all the villages that are in it. There's all the people and the races that are in it. There's the dwarves underground. There's the moon, the whole moon thing, right? That's the world. That's the setting. The characters, you have Kain, you have Cecil, you have Rosa, right? You have Golbez, right? You've got all of these characters. And each of them has a personality and has an arc. Kain is your best friend, but he betrays you, but he helps you, but he betrays you, right? Golbez has a history and a reason for doing what he's doing, right? And then you fight the final boss, and that's a revelation there. Who's the real final boss? It's almost like Star Wars, right? You get to the final boss, and it turns out Darth Vader's not the final boss. It's really the Emperor, and in this case, it's Zeromus, right? Zemus or Zeromus. So, great example there. Great memorable characters. People are like, oh yeah, Kain is like the best character from Final Fantasy. Or Cecil. Cecil starts as a Dark Knight, and then he uncovers his true identity and becomes a Paladin, right? These are really good story moments. And then there's a plot. You go to destroy this village, you have a moral crisis, you have an awakening to what is real. You go on a quest to overthrow the bad guy, and that's the plot, right? It's a sequence of events that lead you eventually to fighting the final boss. And that's going to be the case with virtually every Final Fantasy game. With maybe an exception being like Final Fantasy 12, which just has a lot more other stuff, extra stuff in it. Or one of the MMOs, Final Fantasy 11, Final Fantasy 14. Final Fantasy 14, if you're looking at the not the original version, which you can't play anymore, but the Realm Reborn, it's structured, like I said, to just move you between various set pieces. You go to this zone, then you go to that zone, then you go to this zone. It's just to help you explore the world and to frame that. And there's not, there's kind of a bigger conflict with the Empire, but they're really pretty distant. And it's more about like getting you around the world to introduce you and get you to know the world and to teach you how to play the game. If you look at World of Warcraft, the original World of Warcraft was not about grand conflicts that had to be solved and special characters. You were the special character. The adventurers you played with were special characters. Story emerged from those, and most of the story, the quests, were just to kind of shuffle you around. Like, okay, you're starting here in Goldshire and Northshire Abbey, and then you do some quests here, and then you go off to Westfall, and then you go off to Redridge, and then you go off to, there's like a whole, each little area is its own, so it has its own little bunches of little stories called quests. And you could do them or you can not do them, or you could just grind. It's totally optional, right? That's totally optional. And the stories you really remember are your interactions with the players. So setting characters and plot, those are going to be common. And how you go about exposing them is a little bit unique to the medium. So you have to do two kinds of exposition in a game. You have to do story exposition, where you introduce the person to the world, to the setting, to the characters, and to the plot. And you also have to do gameplay exposition. That is, you have to teach the player how to play the game. You have to introduce game mechanics, usually one at a time, so that they can understand and master each one before you get to like the full complex stack of how all the game elements interact with each other. So if you're playing Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, this is a really good one. What does it start with? It starts with like almost a Star Wars-like narrative. It's got a role telling you about the Golden Land and the Triforce. You start a game, you pick a name, you start a game, you wake up, it's a rainy night, your uncle says he's going out, don't leave the house. Of course, it's a game, you must play it, so you must leave the house. That's the only option. You can't win the game by staying in the house, so you leave. You have no sword, you walk around, the guards have walls. You have to stay in one little area, the guards don't let you out. And you have to figure out what to do, and so eventually you wander around enough, you start getting telepathic messages from the princess that tell you to look for a hidden passage. The only thing you can do is pick up a bush. So you start with one gameplay mechanic. Pick up bushes and pots. So that's all you're doing until you find, it's very clearly, it's an outlined bush. You pick it up. There's a hole. You fall into the hole. Then you get a sword and a shield. The shield you don't actually actively block in Link to the Past, so it's just it will block damage coming in from like one small angle. Then you can use the sword to kill things, and you can pick up pots. So you can do both. So the first level is just swinging a sword, picking up pots to kill bad guys, and then you fight a boss, which is actually not even a boss. It's just like a slightly harder character than what you normally see. And just exploring around to figure out how it is. So it gives you all the big mechanics. Explore, hit things with sword, pick up pots and bushes. That's the first level of Link to the Past. Once you do get a lantern, right? But you don't use the lantern until after you pick up the princess, and then you go into the secret passage. Then you get a light the torches mechanic. So it's very clever in the way it introduces one little thing at a time. Each dungeon gives you a new item. That item enhances the gameplay possibilities of the game. It's a really good structure. They used it for pretty much every Zelda game, from the very first one all the way up until probably Breath of the Wild had that exact structure to the way that they did exposition for the gameplay as well as exposition for the story, right? So they start you off with nothing, and that tends to work pretty good. Danimator says emergent gameplay also gives space for players who can become legends without being told you are the champion of Azeroth. That allows notorious players to become legends. Yeah, that's a totally different thing with classic WoW or classic EverQuest. Was like the peen. Like, this is a famous player who killed people, right? That's like a cool thing. You know, I still see old PvP videos with like, I don't know if I'm in any of them, but I see like people that are in my guild get killed or something. You know, it's like, oh, that's cool. You know, you're kind of a legend. It's a different kind of legend, right? Versus you're a legend in the narrative, right? You're the champion of Azeroth. You know, you're the commander of the Alliance. Versus, you know, get quest 1. Go get me some milk from the cow. Take this stick and go hit the lazy peons. Because you're nobody. You're one step above a peon. So go hit the peons. You know, I like that feeling a lot better. You start from nobody versus like the game telling you how important you are. Which is, they do that in Final Fantasy 14 too. You know, you're special boy. Good job. You know. And I guess the problem I have with that is that, like, they're making you into a narrative character without giving you any traits whatsoever, right? As the silent protagonist, you have whatever traits you decide. And the answer in Final Fantasy 14 is like, none. You don't. You just, your character model stands in cutscenes sometimes. And it works. It's okay. It's just, the main character is just whatever you want the character to be. But the story in like Final Fantasy 14, ultimately your player doesn't make any decisions. You can pick a couple dialogue options and you get a different dialogue, maybe from another character, but it doesn't affect anything. Ultimately, the control of the narrative is out of your hands. It's like, it's Alphino and Alice that are doing all of the, you know, doing all the decision making, and you're just kind of going along with it, right? And that's Final Fantasy 14. That's fine. I rarely play video games on their own. For me, they're mostly something extra to do while listening to a podcast or something. Yeah. So that depends on the game, right? So if you're playing an MMO, I think there was a YouTuber named Josh Strife, and he did a video on this. Like, why do people like to play MMOs by themselves? The answer is because it's like a grind, right? It's something that's kind of fun to do while they're like listening to a podcast or watching a YouTube video in the other monitor. For me, like, I have one big monitor now, and I changed that so that it would be more distraction-free gaming. And it's why I like consoles, is that it's just, I don't have a YouTube video. Once I realized that, like, I was putting a YouTube video on the other monitor all the time to play World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft is actually pretty boring. It's a more boring game, and I didn't watch YouTube videos when I played World of Warcraft in 2004 or 2005 or whatever. I just didn't. That wasn't a thing. YouTube wasn't even out, right? Maybe you listened to music because you got bored of the soundtrack or whatever, but you didn't, like, you didn't watch YouTube videos. So yeah, I realized, like, oh, the game's actually pretty boring. You're just walking around, kill 10 of these, kill 5 of those. There's even like a little thing on your map, like walk here and press this. It gets a little old. Whereas if I'm playing Morrowind, it's like, boom, I don't want anything else on. It's like, I am playing Morrowind, or any of the Elder Scrolls games like that. Have you played Pacific Drive yet? I have not. The game's narrative was handled well. They told the exact amount of story they needed to tell, and they never let it get in the way of the gameplay. Yes. Old MMOs like Ultima Online and Asheron's Call, employees would play as the main characters and roleplay with players. Yeah, this used to happen in EverQuest too. I'm hoping AI tech can allow this sort of interaction in the future of MMOs. KOTOR 2, started role-playing KOTOR 2, and I find it really annoying how the character has his backstory. And when you're given a dialogue option, you have to, in the moment, decide who you are as a character. That's the advantage of the I lost my memory trope in the first game. Is like, there's no backstory you have to decide. So yeah. Yeah, and in KOTOR, the original Knights of the Old Republic, everything is the same except for the last level. And the last level is mostly the same, but there's some different story outcomes depending if you go light side or dark side. So they're very clever in their ability to you just have to have some different dialogue options, and then you get to the final level, and depending on where your light side, dark side is, the characters all react to that, and then you do the final level, either as a bad guy or a good guy. For me, video games on their own aren't all that interesting compared to movies, books, or even old-time radio shows. That's why I rarely get around to playing ones that require full attention. Yeah, it just depends on the person. I get really bored by movies these days. In the first game, you start as a blank slate, but as the game progresses, you learn the world yourself as a character. Yeah, so that's a form of exposition, right? So how should you do exposition in a video game? Let me think about that. There's a bunch of ways you can do it. So if you go the modern Final Fantasy route, this is the full narrative route. You do your exposition through things like cutscenes. Then you have additional exposition through dialogue. So the main exposition, like there's a big opening cutscene, you see things happen, and then you're dropped into the game and you're playing it. And you hopefully have enough information to understand the basics of beginning. Then you can talk to characters. And if you talk to characters, like a dialogue box will pop up, or maybe you'll go into like a dialogue scene, and then you can get a little bit more exposition information, a little bit more information on the world or what's going on, a little bit more character exposition. Who is this character and what is he doing? If you go to more classic Final Fantasy games, it's all done through like dialogue interactions. That's where all the exposition happens. You show up to a new village, you want to know about that village, you start talking to people. That's the only way to get the information that you want. And I like that because it's player directed. The player can get as much information as he wants or as little information as he wants. He can skip the dialogue if he's bored and just try to find someone who's going to progress the story, or just, he can do what he wants. He doesn't have to go talk to every little peasant to figure out the history of this elven village or something like that. So it really is in control of the player, and that's a big advantage of like exposition through dialogue. So with the Final Fantasy model, you have the big exposition and cutscenes, the stuff that you need to know to progress, and then you can have lots of additional information in dialogue, and that works great. A really good way to approach it. With something like Morrowind, it's all indirect exposition. You only get it through talking to characters and interacting with them. I call it indirect exposition. It's not entirely, but like you do it through character dialogue. Indirect exposition it really occurs in narratives where you have players revealing information to the reader without talking to the reader. They talk to each other, and the reader gains information from it indirectly. We don't always do that with games, right? You have dialogue boxes where the player, the character will tell you something. Okay. That's a really good way of doing a story. So if you want a really narrative-focused game, modeling it on Final Fantasy games, either the classic model where you talk to lots of NPCs, or the modern model, which is really focused on cutscenes, both of those work really well. And one of the complaints I remember from Final Fantasy 16 was that it was like, it's just a bunch of gameplay and cutscenes. I'm like, that's what makes it great. That's why this game was fun to play, is it's like gameplay, fun gameplay. Cool, I beat a boss. Here's a cutscene that tells me more of the story. Then I'm on to the next level, killing bad guys, killing monsters, another boss, another cutscene. I loved that format. Why? Because it cut out all the bullshit, right? There was no wasted time. There was a little bit of wasted time in Final Fantasy 16 because you could do side quests, which are kind of like a time waste. But they give you a little bit more story, give you a little bit more information on the world or the characters and what they care about. So if you care about that, then the side quests do give you more story, and they give you rewards, but they're not really necessary to beat Final Fantasy. You could just skip all the side quests if you want to in Final Fantasy 16, and you'll be fine. All your big weapon upgrades come through the story. Minor weapon upgrades you can get through side quests, but like, you don't really need to do them. You can just be good, just skill up and learn to dodge, and you can beat every boss in the game without having to do any side quests. Just a little tip there. But that's what I loved about it. It was like, same thing with Final Fantasy 13. What was that? People are like, oh, you walk down a corridor and then there's cutscenes. Yeah. It's a story-focused game. It has a big story, and that's probably what made it better than other games. It was like, Here's a big cutscene. Cool. Here's a bunch of gameplay. Cool. Here's a cutscene. Cool. It's like, well, you're not exploring. Well, the first 10 chapters of Final Fantasy 13 aren't about exploring. They're just about fighting bad guys and having story, and that's okay. If you let go of what you want and you just see what the game is giving you, it's a really fun experience. Versus exploration of nothing, which was my complaint of really both new Zelda games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. You're just walking around an empty world. You talk to NPCs, they don't really tell you much. The story's barely present, so you don't really care that much about what's going on. And the main thing is exploration gets you nothing. Whereas exploration in old Zelda games got you a lot of rewards. Doesn't really get you... In fact, it penalizes you. You get penalized for exploring. Because you just fight more bad guys, which means your weapons break, which means you're just in a worse state than you were before because all your weapons are broken and you ate half your food. You know? So yeah, that's the way I would format it if I wanted a narrative-heavy game. Cutscene, gameplay, dialogue with NPCs if the player wants extra. You can even find... I'll give you a third way, which is Dragon Age Origins did this. So Dragon Age Origins had this codex. So as you clicked on objects in the environment, you got XP, and that would open up a codex. Now you could read that. You could go into the menus, read the codex. Here is some lore information about phylacteries or something, about elves and the elf... What did they call it? The ghetto that they kept the elves in. I don't remember what they called it. The alienage. Right? So yeah, here's some information on that. And you could just read the lore. Like its own little Wikipedia system or something. Super cool. Optional. You didn't have to... You could skip that and understand the game perfectly. You could totally skip it and understand the game perfectly. But if you were really interested in that world, which I was when I played it in 2009, I read all of them because I thought they were really cool. It's like, oh, it's cool. I could just directly read information about stuff. So that's another technique you could use is like, you click it and it's an optional dialogue to read. Final Fantasy 16 has a ton of this. There's so much stuff you could read about, but you don't have to. You could just run through, run to the objective, kill monsters, watch cutscene, beat the game. You can do that, and it's great. So, let's talk about Oblivion and Skyrim and Morrowind, since people are talking about it in chat. Before I get to it, because this is a different thing. It's like at the opposite end, right? Like Final Fantasy, it's like you're doing the narrative. So if you care about the narrative, like a bad guy, and you have a plot to kill the bad guy, you should, in my opinion, go more in the Final Fantasy direction, the JRPG direction. Versus trying to shoehorn a Western RPG into a narrative-heavy story, a story where you really want to tell a narrative with the beginning, middle, end, conflict, all that kind of stuff. A Skyrim-style game is probably not the best way to do that. It's often a joke that people like never finish the main quest of Oblivion or Morrowind. Because that's not what the game's about. And that's okay. So I'll get to that in a second. Let me read the chat. Yes. Morrowind. Do you have any opinions on Emil Pagliarulo, the main writer of Bethesda? After Starfield, people have really been fed up with his subpar writing. His defense is basically you aren't a writer, so shut up. Okay, well, so here's a really easy thing, right? We are makers. This is an argument that you can use for writing or for anything else. Okay, we are consumers of many products. We are producers of one product. So we have expertise in the one product we produce. Like, let's say you are a carpenter, right? So you understand your carpentry job. Maybe you frame houses or something. Okay. Everybody lives in a house or in an apartment that maybe has some wood framing. Not everybody, but most people do, right? So does that mean that they can't judge a poor job? No, they can. The wall falls down. Obviously, the carpenter did a bad job. Just because you didn't put that up or you didn't have the skill doesn't mean you can't judge the outcomes of that. The wall falls over because the carpenter didn't put nails in the wood. He's a bad carpenter. You don't have to be a carpenter to judge that. He didn't put brackets on anything. He didn't put any. The wall came apart. I had a thing with my house had all kinds of damage from this storm a while back, or at this point it's been like 2 months or something. I don't even know. But anyway, we found when we took the drywall off that they had they did this really weird thing to hold the pipe up where like the wood was sticking out half an inch, and they had cut a little hole in the drywall and like painted over it so you couldn't tell. It was a really genius way to hide it. The problem was, how do you fix that? Like that wasn't a correct thing. It's like you have to cut that little piece of wood off or do something with it, right? And whoever did the drywall didn't do that, and so now there's like this bulge in the drywall where they just like tried to put the drywall around it. It's like, that looks bad. Well, you're not a drywall guy. Actually, I am a drywall guy in a way. I drywalled my garage, but like it's like I could see that it moves. Like I'm not used to walls that do this, so maybe we could fix that. It's not like he's bad for doing that, but we want that thing fixed. Just as an example, right? There's many other examples. A doctor, right? A doctor who cuts your jugular and lets you bleed out is a bad doctor. You don't have to be a doctor to know when the outcomes of what somebody does in their job are bad. So similarly, you don't have to be a writer to tell that the writing in Starfield is bad. You don't enjoy it. That's a perfectly valid criticism. I didn't like it. These characters were stupid. I thought they were dumb. I hated all of them. The story was boring. Nothing about it was interesting. These are all complaints that anybody can make about a story. I tend to make more technical complaints because I'm a writer. So my technical complaints would be maybe different than a non-writer's complaints. A non-writer would say like, this character is stupid and I hated him. There's a lot of information in that, but I would be like, this character did these things wrong and that's why he's bad. Like I could give you a really deep explanation for why the character's bad or why I didn't like him, but the end result's the same. If the story is not enjoyable, then it's bad. the person's not wrong for not enjoying it. Or maybe if it's universally disliked, you're not writing that story for the correct audience. We'll put it that way, right? Maybe there's an audience that story is for, but it's not the audience who's buying the Bethesda games. There's a mismatch with the audience. That's a really nice way of putting it, right? Like if I were selling I have a fantasy book series, right? Here's one. This has romance in it. This is a bad example. I don't know. Let's say I'm writing and like the third book turns into a straight up erotica novel. And people are like, what's with all this gratuitous sex? Oh, you aren't a writer. You need to shut up. The person can complain about that. They had a certain set of expectations and I gave them something different. That's okay complaint, right? Okay. Morrowind had great dialogue exposition. You could ask about rumors and investigate them. And one of the advantages of Morrowind is that it's not voiced, which means you can have a lot more dialogue. Because it's really easy to write a line. It takes a lot more stuff to record that line and then have it play back correctly, versus just like writing a line and having like if this is clicked, it displays that. I having done like some basic programming with RPGs, it's not that hard to program, like basic dialogue responses. Or in a visual novel, same idea. Versus having everything voiced can get a lot more complicated, and you have to have someone record it all. And it takes up more space, and it takes more time to listen to someone than to read it, right? Anyone whose defense of criticism is you aren't X knows their work is subpar. Yeah. Do you think Oblivion and Skyrim suffered from fully voiced dialogue? Okay, yes, I basically answered that. I think they did. I think fully voiced dialogue has other advantages, namely that you have the advantage of an actor giving you all that extra... Acting imparts a lot of extra information into a scene. Right? There's emotion in the voice. Does that mean everything needs to be voiced? Imagine that you had a system that's more like Final Fantasy 12. Sometimes it's voiced. If you're clicking random NPCs, it's just a little dialogue box that pops up. Or Final Fantasy 14. Sometimes the cutscenes are voiced. Other times it's just dialogue. Right? It's about finding that path that is going to be efficient for you as the developer to deliver the things that you want to deliver. Maybe that's fully voiced, and you want that fully voiced experience because you want all that depth. It's going to cost a lot more money and take a lot more time to record all those lines of dialogue and have them play back correctly and to sound correctly, right? Like, if you're doing this as an independent, and let's say you want to have fully voiced dialogue in your game, well, you hire a bunch of voice actors to record stuff maybe in their in their office or in their studio, right, to save money. You don't have them come to your studio and you hire a sound engineer. So all of them sound a little different production-wise. This guy's really, he's really close to the mic. And this other guy, he's really far away from the mic. And this other guy has reverb, and this other guy has no reverb. And how do those things mix together? You may have to do a lot of audio processing work to make those work. Or you have to have everybody come into the same studio and work with the same engineer to record everything the same way. And that's a big expense. So it's kind of where your budget is and what you think is necessary to make the product good, right? I can't get through Rebirth. I had to put it down after Chapter 9. It has the same problems as New Zelda's, but not as bad since you actually get rewarded for combat. Oh, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Yes. So my complaint... All right, let me complain, because this is a story complaint. My complaint about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the same complaint I had about Final Fantasy VII Disc 2. It's just all over the place. There's no main conflict. The characters don't have a strong reason to do most of the things they're doing. It's very weak on the conflict area. You even meet the president's son, and you don't do anything about it. You're trying to chase Sephiroth, but you don't really know why. The conflict is very uncertain in Disc 2 of Final Fantasy VII. A lot of players didn't notice that because they were just having fun exploring the world, and I think that's true of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as well. But the main thing is that you just are doing kind of the same thing. You're just exploring around, and yeah, it looks great. The gameplay is actually really fun, but there's not a strong story in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, not like there is in the first one. And I said this, and it's very controversial, and people want to crucify me for saying it, is like, Final Fantasy VII Remake was better than the original Final Fantasy VII because it was only Midgar, because it was only Disc 1. Because it was only Disc 1, it was better, because the story really it just is not as good after you leave Midgar. Midgar's where the aesthetic weight is, it's where the story weight is, it's where all the conflict is. And once you leave Midgar in the original game, things get just a lot looser. You're not a lot less certain about what you're doing and why you're trying to do it until you get to Disc 3, and then things really go towards that conclusion. So Disc 2, it's a midpoint. People are scrambling, they're reacting, they're trying to find things. So you have a whole game that's just a big story midpoint, and it just doesn't have a strong conflict. All elves should be in ghettos. Around elves, watch yourselves. The best story beat in Starfield was canceled out by the beat that immediately followed it. Is Hellblade 2 a game? So far I've seen for it is that it is a 6-hour game. Like The Order. I think that's what people were comparing it to. That's a short game. To me, that could be an advantage because I don't have a lot of time to play. But if I'm not having fun for all of those 6 hours, like a 6-hour game, Portal, perfect game, right? It's like an 8-hour game tops. But it's fun every moment of the way. 6 hours of boring, I'd rather watch Lord of the Rings, or I'd rather watch Game of Thrones for 6 hours. If it's 6 hours of a lot of fun, then that's different. I don't want them to pad the game. It's like, this game is 100 hours. Is it 100 hours of fun, or is it 100 hours of BS? Most of the case, it's the latter. Whenever I see an Ubisoft game or play one, like sometimes you get one from like the Sony subscription or whatever. You load it up, you play it, you get through the tutorial, and then it's like, here's an open map where you wander around and do the same thing 100 times. I'm like, I'm done. I don't need 40 hours of the same crap. Let's go back to Assassin's Creed 1 and 2. That they really nailed it. It's a little bit of that, but it's mostly like, here's your task to assassinate this person. That's what I want. I want it to be more like Hitman. I want it to be like the Assassin's Guild or the Dark Brotherhood in Oblivion, where it's like, here's your target. Figure out how to kill him. You get a bonus if you kill him in this way. Barely does it have combat, and you can die and fail objectives. It has puzzles. I heard the puzzles were just like rammed in there. They're just like interrupting the flow. Like, ugh. I finished Rebirth. Yeah, Final Fantasy VII fell apart for me after Midgar. Very rarely people will agree with me. Most people for whom Final Fantasy VII was their first JRPG, they have a deep love of that game and that story and the characters. And I gotta say, the characters are great. I think people are okay to like those characters. But it wasn't my first RPG experience, so I judged it through a light where it just didn't impress me very much, the original Final Fantasy VII. It's an okay game. I think it's actually a good game, but it's not, to me, it's like B tier Final Fantasy VII. Like Final Fantasy games, there's like S tier, like the top tier Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy 4, 6, probably 12, Final Fantasy Tactics. Those are like the 4 big boys. Like those games are some of the best games ever made. Yeah, I'm putting Final Fantasy 12 up there. S tier. Hell yeah. A tier, you got like Final Fantasy 10. It's pretty good. It's actually a great introduction to the series. Great place to start. Final Fantasy 5, Final Fantasy 3. Final Fantasy 13 is between A and B. I think it's actually way underrated. Final Fantasy 16. B tier, it's Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, I'm sorry. S tier is going to be like 4, 6, 9, 12. 12 being like the worst of the top tier. I love Final Fantasy 12. It's just not as perfect as like Final Fantasy 4. Final Fantasy 4 is like legendary. Anyway, I don't need to get off on that tangent. It's just never been like my favorite Final Fantasy game. I've always thought it was a good game. Just, it's not very hard. The gameplay is not that deep. The magic system's okay. It's not bad. And the story didn't wow me, especially after Midgar. But Final Fantasy VII Remake, it's like that little encapsulated story with those aesthetics. It's great. And the gameplay is really fun too. I like the action RPG gameplay. Other people disagree. That's okay. You don't have to like every kind of gameplay. They wanted a super graphical remake of Final Fantasy VII. I understand that. I definitely understand that perspective. Not wanting that ARPG thing. It's cool. Game writers today have made criticism impossible. If you aren't in the industry, you don't know enough to comment on it. If you are in the industry, it's rude to criticize and are expected to be quiet. So what you're saying is Final Fantasy VII's praise is largely just because of the opening and final hours, and the rest is rubbish garbage. Makes sense. Final Fantasy IX and Final Fantasy X was much better written. Yeah, Final Fantasy IX had some hiccups in the third act, but it was really good, and it was aesthetically just a great game. Final Fantasy X, honestly, it was the first fully voiced one. They did a really good job, and because there's not a whole lot of just like extra stuff for you to have to explore through text, it works. It works pretty good. I just think the character designs were kind of bonkers. They're very 1999, not in a good way. But Final Fantasy X was good. I think it's actually a really good place to start the series. Because good graphics, good aesthetics, good story, likable characters. RPG system that's really easy to understand, but can also be a little bit deeper if you want. Rebirth had a lot of padding. I agree, but the problem was that there wasn't a lot of conflict. That's why all of it felt like padding. Did you play Assassin's Creed Mirage? I did not. The last Assassin's Creed game I played... No, I think I played like the demo for Odyssey. Not the demo, like the tutorial. And thought it was ridiculous. Ubisoft makes terrible games because they never learn the right lessons from their successes. Every game is a clone of Far Cry 3, but it's the worst aspects of the Far Cry 3 formula. Yeah. Far Cry 3, what was it? Far Cry 3, the weird cyberpunk one they made. Not Laser Dragon. Blood Dragon. That one is way more fun than regular Far Cry 3. 12 in the top is spicy. 12 is good. Tactics is good. Tactics is probably my favorite Final Fantasy game. Gameplay is just awesome. 10 is the best Final Fantasy story-wise for me. Perfect example of Tidus being a standing character asking how the world works, fish out of water. Exactly, that's a great way. So you can use this technique. I talked about it a little bit on the Ubisoft video. Is like there is a storytelling technique called a fish out of water, where And you can use this for games. It's great because you can do gameplay exposition and you can do story exposition both at the same time. Fish Out of Water is the main character is not from the world, and so he asks all of the questions that you would ask as the player. So yeah, Titus is from Xanarkand, and now we're in this weird, where am I? Oh, here's where you are, and here's what's going on, and here's how you fight, and here's how you play blitzball. It's like, oh, I already know how to play blitzball. Here's the tutorial anyway. I like 5 the most. I love the job system for 5 and 3 a lot. Just 5 5 is good. It's definitely like an A-tier game. What am I talking about? I'm not going to give a lot of criticisms for 5. I played it live on the show. It's a great game. 8 is my favorite. I need to actually play 8 on the air. Final Fantasy Stranger of Paradise is much better written than it has any right to be. Final Fantasy Stranger of Paradise is much more fun than I expected it to be. It's much more aesthetically pleasing than I'm like, this game's going to be so stupid with this like shaved head Jack character going like, I have to kill chaos. It's like, this game is really fun. Yeah, I like Stranger of Paradise a lot. Kind of a sleeper hit, really good. I wonder if a modern remake of the first Final Fantasy would be any good. That's Final Fantasy Stranger of Paradise, baby. It's great. I like it better than the original game. The original Final Fantasy game is good for what it is, but it had so many bugs. Things didn't work, and you just really had to embrace back in the day that you were just going to wander around and die a lot before you figured out what you were doing. Jack is my favorite Final Fantasy protagonist. Everybody's like, it's just like Dude Bro from like 1999. What's up with him? And it's like, I actually really like this Dude Bro from 1999. He's awesome. I have to kill chaos. It's a need. I love that everybody's yelling at each other. It's like it has a good visceral feeling to the combat. Funny that you say Final Fantasy XIV is peak storytelling. I didn't say that because the fake out deaths and random third act moon stuff. Oh, Final Fantasy IV. That's what we're talking about, yeah. And Rosa Romance felt really bad to me. No, they're good. It's all good. So the third act moon stuff is really, they've done this in previous games, but it's more about expanding the conflict so that it explains everything, right? You have to bring everything into play. Like, what is this all about? It's Golbez being bad to try to be good in some ways, you know? Genuinely, the ultimate sleeper hit kind of got me to Final Fantasy when I had no interest before. At least the Dissidia stuff, yeah. Yeah, I like Final Fantasy Stranger of Paradise a lot. So let's talk about Elder Scrolls. Excuse me. So Elder Scrolls is a series where the main 3 games that people are going to think of are Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. Not thinking a lot of Arena or Daggerfall, but this kind of applies to them as well. But really, we're thinking about those 3, and we're not thinking about Elder Scrolls Online, which is just kind of uses the World of Warcraft theme park MMO formula and does a pretty good job with it. I think it looks good. I like the gameplay. Overall, I think I think both the Final Fantasy and Elder Scrolls MMOs are fun MMOs to play. But I don't currently... I currently have an active sub to Final Fantasy XIV, but it's because I need something really low effort to play before I go to sleep. That's what that's doing right now. I just need like an easy MMO. So yeah, let's talk about Elder Scrolls. What's the storytelling of Elder Scrolls? Elder Scrolls, those 3 games are really about you exploring a world and finding the stories that interest you. And really, it's about the game of making your character stronger to do more difficult things. So like getting gear, learning spells, those sorts of things. If you're looking for which one has the strongest main narrative, it's Morrowind. Morrowind has a really strong overarching narrative compared to Oblivion for sure, and definitely I think it's better than Skyrim's as far as how compelling it is and interesting it is and how it influences the entire world. But all of them have like a main story. That main story really just frames the whole game. So if we look at Oblivion, you're in the prison. The Emperor comes in. He gives you a little prophecy. You have a task. Take this amulet to Jory over here at the Wayne Priory. Okay. It just gives you something to do. It gives you a reason to move in the game. But you don't have to follow that. You could, and it tells you after you leave the sewers, or you could just wander off and see what there is to see. As you do that quest, you know, when I first played, that was the first thing I did. I went to Wayne Priory and started doing that quest, and ended up opening all the Oblivion gates and all that kind of stuff. But as you explore, you find new things, and those finding new things end up taking you down a path that you're more interested in, whatever it's going to be. It could be a series of quests for a guild, or it could be just exploring a town, or it could be like trying to learn a certain set of skills to make your character more powerful. It gives you something to move forward so that you can find the thing that you're really interested in the game. And this is true in Morrowind. In Morrowind, they probably, I would say the beginning of Morrowind is probably the toughest of those three games for new players, because like you're asked to craft your character with this character creator and pick a class and do all that kind of stuff without knowing the game, and it works. Then you're like, okay, what do I do? And every character will pretty much tell you to take a Silt Strider over to the next town to talk to the character you're supposed to talk to. And it forces you to talk to lots of NPCs to figure out, where is this character? Where is Caius Casades or whoever? Where is he? Oh, he's over. Check here. Check in this corner club, and then you're going to find him over in this room. So it just kind of gets you to do the game. It's a frame for learning to talk to characters and get items. And then when you get there, he's like, I'll have another quest for you, but you need to get more experience first. Here's some gold. Go buy some training. Go talk to the guilds. So he gets you to go talk to, like, you know, go join the Fighters Guild or something and do some quests. So Morrowind really gets you to try to go on those other paths really early, whereas Oblivion and Skyrim both just sort of leave it up to you what you do. You'll find those things as you go. You know, if you're playing Skyrim, there's this frame of like, you have to go warn about the dragons. So you go warn about the dragons, you do that, then you figure out you're the Dragonborn, then you go up on the mountain, blah, blah, blah. As you're going up on the mountain, of course, you walk around, you meet other towns, maybe you end up in the Thieves Guild, and that interests you more, so you start doing those quests. You just sort of go off in whatever area you want to. I remember in Oblivion, I murdered a guy, ended up murdering a guy. He kept insulting me, so I thought he was aggroed on me, so I killed him, and I went to jail. And then I ended up in the Murderers Guild, and that was a lot of fun. I just kind of didn't do the main quest for a while. Instead, I just did the Murderers Guild, and that was fun. So the stories in the Elder Scrolls it's more like a collection of possible stories you could do, quests. So you could do the Thieves Guild, and there's like a story to the Thieves Guild, but most of it involves doing things that are with the Thieves Guild that you find interesting. A lot of it's about doing the interesting things, not doing the interesting stories, but doing interesting things that like make your character stronger or are just fun to do. So if you're in the Thieves Guild, it's like, go steal a diamond. Okay, I have to figure out how to steal a diamond. This guy, Abasi or whoever needs a diamond. Sugar Lips needs a diamond, and we'll go find a diamond. Or in Oblivion, it's like, here's your target, go kill him, and you'll get a reward. Cool. I love hunting people down and killing them, trying to kill them with stealth. It's a challenge. You know, here's another target, go poison him. Or you come across random quests. Go over here. I'm the Grey Prince. Go over here and prove that I'm a prince. Turns out your dad's a vampire. Oh, I want to die. Kill me in the arena. Like, I love that each one of those is like a little self-contained story with a character, at least one character, a place that you're doing it, and places that you go on the map that sometimes are far flung, and then there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a conflict, there's a problem that has to be solved, and you solve it. So every quest that has you doing things is solving a problem. I need you to go recover this book for me. Go steal it for me. How do I do that? You figure it out. That's fun. That's fun. But yeah, Elder Scrolls is not about the main quest nearly as much as it's about all the other quests, all the other stories that put the whole thing together, make it feel like it's a living, breathing world, like it's a real place, even though it doesn't. Like, you feel like it could be a real place, not that it is a real place. I sometimes make that distinction because, like, Skyrim is small, but it feels like it could be a representation of like a real giant place, and that's a lot of fun. Oh, yes, with Jack. You can play under the impression that it's a generic fantasy world, but then you look under the surface and find one of the most insane settings, yeah. Jack felt like a rebuke of the Final Fantasy anime protagonist, aka no emotional existential crisis, no effeminate boy attitude appearance, and his goal is simple, not complicated. Yep, kill chaos. Jack interrupts villain speeches so no time is wasted. I love that. Shut up, I'm gonna kill you. Yeah, great houses are really well done in Morrowind. Everything is done well in Morrowind, right? Any place that you want to go explore and like get deep into, there's a lot to it. Even if the quests are honestly really simple, because the quests are like, I need a book, I need a diamond. Go over here and click this thing. But it feels deeper than it is because there's a lot of dialogue behind it, and there's a lot of history behind it, and sometimes there's challenging and funny things that happen as a result of it. The Morg Tong was a neatish secret path you could follow. Yeah, you could eventually find like the little trapdoor in the arena section of Arena Canton in Vivek and go down there. I became the head of it. It was a lot of fun. I love that he just told you who you needed to kill, and you had to go find him. Sometimes it was really hard to find the target. I love Elder Scrolls, but the game doesn't stop stacking unwanted quests on you. It's like Shrek said, quest, I've already got a quest. Yeah, you just ignore those and do what you want. That's the whole point. If Oblivion Unreal Engine 5 remaster is announced next month, what issues do you want fixed in it? So, what would I change about Oblivion? That's a good question. Yeah, Elder Scrolls is the epitome of it's about the journey, not the destination. So, the things that I would list are purely gameplay things. Oblivion, I think, overall has the best combat of any Elder Scrolls game by, to me, a wide margin, and the best kind of combination of a leveling and RPG system versus a like an action combat kind of system. So I would want lockpicking to have higher skill checks. Lockpicking is a minigame you can master really quickly, and then lockpicking becomes a dead skill. I wish it was more like Morrowind in that you couldn't just brute force your way into the hardest locks using skill. I get the idea of like wanting to make that more interactive and give you something that's skill-based, but you know, being good at the lockpicking minigame basically means you're good at lockpicking, which means that the entire skill is pointless. Same thing with speechcraft. Like the speechcraft minigame is kind of dumb. I think speech checks are better. They make you, if you're gonna want to be good at speechcraft, you got to really commit to it. That would be the two things that I would improve. Those two skills are basically dead. And personality as an attribute is also kind of a dead attribute. I would love to see more illusion spells of a little stronger and more meaningful impact. Otherwise, I think Oblivion's pretty good to go, you know. Maybe more dialogue options. That'd be cool. Better faces, you know, like the more of the modded faces. Yeah. That's probably the only thing I'd change. Otherwise, like, I think it works. I like the locations and the story. I hope they still have full screen glow if they do that, but they probably won't. It'll be like high fidelity stuff. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I would change. I like that Morrowind had a lot more exclusivity between different paths. Like, I wish... I was really disappointed by most of the original vampire stuff in Skyrim. Like, there wasn't a big penalty to being a vampire, whereas, like, in Morrowind, it's huge. It's just a different game if you become a vampire. So, like, a better vampire system would probably be good. I don't think the leveling's broken at all. It's the same as Morrowind's leveling. I didn't know how the leveling worked first time I played Oblivion. I never had problems doing anything in the game. I think people maybe just need to get better at games, or like pay attention to how the leveling system works. I made videos on it because it's in the manual, but I think people didn't read the manual, especially in the digital age. They're like, there's a manual? Yeah. But yeah, so I think it's a great leveling system. It's probably my favorite leveling system of the Elder Scrolls games I wouldn't say by a wide margin, but Morrowind, the problem with Morrowind is that once you get to like level, if you know what you're doing, once you get to level 30, the game is completely nerfed. It's so easy. Whereas in Oblivion, you have to really know what you're doing to be able to do that at level 30, to just obliterate the game. The game is always of a sufficient enough challenge for you to not feel like you're completely safe and you'll never die. Whereas in Morrowind, by level 30 in Morrowind, I'm invincible and I can kill anything in the game without trying, Whereas Oblivion, it's extremely difficult to get to that point. You have to get, above level 40, max attributes, Feldew, Addiction, plus Curate to push your attributes into the 120 range. You have to get full damage reflect gear, and then finally, you're still not invincible, but you can kill anything with ease. So I think, just maybe get better at the game. Morrowind's leveling. People like Morrowind's leveling. I think Morrowind is too hard at the beginning and it's too easy at the end. I might do a little tweaking if I was redoing Morrowind like that, or just do better explanation for the characters. Like, you need to pick this. You will be bad at. You won't be able to hit a mud crab unless you have a skill in that weapon. Like, whenever you start, give somebody like free 5 points of training in their preferred weapon to just let them hit mud crabs with whatever weapon they want. Just remember, if you got too good at combat, the mud crabs wouldn't take... mud crabs didn't really level up with you. So the way leveling worked in Oblivion, mud crabs were never a problem. Mud crabs are always like, hit them once and they die. But what would happen is, if you were significantly underleveled, which you can do, which would only really happen if you made a custom class and played a really certain way. It's actually hard to really be underleveled. But what could happen is, like, let's say you threw all your points into agility skills. You're like, I'm going to do like stealth and archery and blah, 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 right? And so your agility is 100 and every other stat is super low. So a mud crab could kill you if it hits you enough. And you have to shoot it with arrows or, at like point blank to kill it. And you have to run away from ogres. Now, I did that the first playthrough. My agility was 100 and every other stat was 0. I had to like kite things in circles and I thought it was fun. Because I was like, oh yeah, I'm a weak little archer that has to jump around in circles. It's perfect. And I really enjoyed that. I actually really enjoyed that about Oblivion. It was like that challenge once I got up into the higher levels. Because your attributes will fall behind. But the truth is, like, for most people, anybody who's going to play like a basic warrior class, you're going to have enough health and armor to like not die. And whatever weapon you choose to use, like a sword, is going to be high enough you're going to be able to kill stuff. So if you just play warrior in Oblivion, you'll probably be fine. I think you've run into trouble if you're trying to come up with some kind of really weird class to play, which honestly didn't work in Morrowind either. If you were like, I'm going to be a wizard and I'm going to have 0 armor, and that doesn't work. It just doesn't work out for you. You're better off like being a tanky sword bash class, So, but anyway, what would happen is that you would encounter different kinds of creatures as you were higher level. So you'd go into an area, if you were like level 1, it would be like goblins. And if you were level 10, it would be trolls. And if you were level 30, it would be ogres. And if you're level 40, it'd be minotaurs. So you just, it gives you a harder enemy to beat. The problem with that was actually not the harder enemies. It's that certain things you could only get from certain enemies, like scamp skin, only came from scamps. Where are the scamps? Well, after like level 10, you stop finding scamps. So it's like hard to get scamp skin. So that's the main problem with the leveling, is that because it changes what kind of creatures you encounter, you can actually not get certain ingredients like scamp skin or like clanfear claws. Not that you really have to use those for alchemy, but they're really nice. So, yeah, that was the main problem. Or then you'd encounter vampires, and the vampires would get progressively better armor. So at higher levels, you'd run in, they'd be wearing glass and Daedric armor, and would just be really hard to kill. Unless you use like a fire skill or something. Yeah. You can level up your sword stuff, but you have to give yourself some strength too. So I have a whole thing on how to level it. You know, ideally you will get a couple points in like 3 attributes when you level up, or 2 and luck maybe. And if you're just playing Oblivion normally and getting a couple points here and there, your attributes will rise enough that you'll be okay. You know, that's how it is. You can also just avoid leveling up in Oblivion. That's a strategy some people use. Is your skills go up and up and up, so you keep doing more and more damage, but everything stays low level. So you become a god running around the game at level 1 with 100 sword skill. Do you think people would abandon Steam if Microsoft acquired it? No. I don't think they would. No, I don't think they would. Yeah. I don't have anything else to add to that. All right. Done a lot of talk on games. It's getting a little bit late here. How long have we been streaming? 1 hour and 20 minutes. I think I'm going to skip the writing portion, the live write portion, and we'll do that on Saturday. If there's any other stuff that you would want to talk about as far as games go, now's like the time to talk about it, especially games and story. Why don't I talk about some of my favorite stories in video games? Whether it's the story of the whole game or it's like a sub-story. Some of my favorite stories in video games. I'm going to go with... I really loved the Thieves Guild in Oblivion as a story, because it starts pretty small. You're just a thief, and you're kind of like Thief with a Heart of Gold. We're going to protect the people of the waterfront against these guards that are trying to oppress them. So you get a little bit of a good guy vibe, but you're still mostly a thief. You get thieving jobs, which are really fun. And the thieving jobs, each of them has a little story, you know, that's involved with it. You're going to steal this bust, and there's surprises like ghosts that spawn that you have to get away from. But I really loved the final parts of the Thieves Guild quest, where you're working for the Gray Fox. And the Gray Fox reveals that once you become the Gray Fox, you can't be anything but the Gray Fox. Your actual identity becomes lost to everyone. It's just a great twist. But he's working on a way to undo it. And so you plot to steal one of the Elder Scrolls. And this heist quest was so well done, and it was so fun. You went through this underground labyrinth and had to get past zombies and all kinds of things like that. I think by the time I did it, I was high level, so they were like headless zombies. And you had to shoot an arrow accurately into this statue. And if you missed, you got to go find that arrow. You could actually fail if you can't find the arrow. Like if the arrow clipped into something that you couldn't find it, you'd have to reload a save, you know, or just be content that you could never finish the game. You had to shoot this key, you put a key on an arrow, and you had to shoot it one time accurately with an arrow or with a bow into like the statue. And the statue would open up and you could get down and get in. Before you did that, you had to like go in, you had to sneak into the tower, get past the guards, and like touch this hourglass, and then sneak out, go through the underground labyrinth, shoot this arrow. Then you are in the tower, and you have to sneak past all the guards, not wake anyone up. You have to go into this area where there's blind moth priests, and you have to pretend to be someone else, and they hand you the Elder Scroll. I don't know if you can even look at it and go blind, but in Elder Scrolls 5, once you get the Elder Scroll, you look at it and you're like, makes you go blind. It's cool. You get the Elder Scroll. You've done all these quests beforehand. One of them is to get the boots of Spring Hill Jack, a vampire. You sneak past the guards. You go into the chimney. You put on the boots. If you don't put on the boots, you will die. Unless you're smart like me and want to keep the boots. In which case, you can fortify your acrobatics and have max acrobatics. And just if you just have max acrobatics, you won't die. You fall down. If you are wearing the shoes, it will break the shoes. If you don't wear the shoes, that script is gone and you can keep the shoes forever. Just a fun heads up. You can keep the boots of Spring Hill Jack forever in Oblivion. Then you escape out. You get the Elder Scroll back. He alters the Elder Scroll, and then he's able to regain his identity. It turns out he's like the Count of, where is it, Anvil? Yeah, I think he's either Coral or Anvil. I'm trying to remember which one. And his wife is like, oh, it's good to see you. And then you get the mask. And the mask lets you turn, and he's changed time. So by stealing the Elder Scroll, because it's both a prophecy and a history, he can rewrite time if he can alter the Elder Scroll, and that's exactly what he does. It's a really fun little story element. It's like, we're going to fix the problem by altering history. And I have elements of that in some of my books, by the way. It doesn't work out the way characters want it to, but I have stuff like that. And then you get the mask, and you can become the Gray Fox. And any crime you do while you're the Gray Fox, that gets attributed to the Gray Fox, not you. So you could kill someone with the Gray Fox mask on, and then take it off, and people are like, where did he go? That dastardly villain. Very fun item. Do you think we should get more voiced protagonists? I don't think it matters. I think it matters on the story only. Do you want to tell a story where the main character is who he is, a shepherd or something? Or do you want to tell a story where somebody is making the character? Like, yeah, you can make your shepherd look however you want him to look, but is it a story where it's like you're making your character, like in World of Warcraft, or is it a story, or like Baldur's Gate? Or is it a story where that character has a personality? If it has a personality, it's okay to voice it, in my opinion. But it's okay to have a silent protagonist. Dragon Age Origins did it great. I think Dragon Age 2 suffered because it tried to make this, this protagonist that was himself, but he was also a blank slate. It didn't work. It didn't work as good. Maybe your thoughts on game writers who seem to hate the medium use game writing as therapy. I don't have too much to say about that other than, I think there's a lot of bad games out there as a result. I think one of the big problems with the gaming industry is not understanding the medium. I don't think this is as much a problem in Japan as it is in the West. A lot of people want to tell stories when they should be using a novel. If all you want to do is tell a story, you should write a novel. If you're wanting some level of interactivity to affect that story, you have a game in mind, then you do a game. Right? But I think a lot of them, I don't know, maybe they get into the games writing industry because they don't like books and they're not capable of writing them. That wasn't always true. Like, the lead writer for Dragon Age Origins wrote books in the Dragon Age universe. He knew how to write books. He was a real writer before he left the company, And I didn't like some of the other further games he worked on, but I wouldn't say the writing was bad. I didn't think the writing of Dragon Age 2 was bad. I think they just lacked a really central conflict to drive everything and frame the game. Do you think older games were actually better, or is it just people looking through nostalgia lenses? Well, having gone back and played them, I think in a lot of cases they're better. In some cases it's nostalgia lenses. And there's no razor that I can give you to tell the difference other than you can, if you haven't played those old games, go back and play them and see if they are still fun. And if they are, then they probably really are a good game. The mistake a lot of newer games make is they just aren't very fun to play. Like, they didn't think about making a game where, like, old game designer would be like, I'm going to make a game where you're like a secret agent and you can like pull guns out of people's hands and kill people and you can do this and the levels will be like this. Like, then they make that. They have a bunch of zany ideas that make a game. Whereas now it's like, okay, we're going to make a game and here's the focused market thing. It has to have this kind of DLC and it has to be this kind of game about this kind of protagonist. And she's got to be black or we can't get this DEI money and blah, blah, blah. Right? There's like a whole committee that designs a game and it's never about the fun idea of playing a game. It's about a bunch of other crap. How do we extract as much money as possible from our rube of a customer? And then it's like, then people are flabbergasted that people don't play their games because they aren't fun. You know, you got to start with the fun idea. Morrowind, even Doom, all of these old games were just full of fun ideas. Like the developers would be like, what if we had this? And they just put it in the game. World of Warcraft is full of stuff like this. What if we had a village that was werewolves at night and humans in the day? It's like, then they did that. So I think a lot of older games are better. Plus you have the benefit of filtering. So there's a ton of stinkers from the past. But the games that people carry forward into the present are the games that have held up over the years. And the games that they don't remember are the ones that probably aren't worth playing. You know, there's a ton of games. I shouldn't say that. There's not a ton of games for the Nintendo 64. Most of the games for the Nintendo 64 are bad. But there's a few really good games. So that gives people to think that the Nintendo 64 was like some kind of high watermark for gaming because Ocarina of Time was good. It's like there were like 5 good games for the Nintendo 64, whereas for the PlayStation 1 there was like 200 good games. Like games that still people would still play now. You know. So yeah. So I think older games were better on average. But I think we're also dealing with a time filtering thing where we are seeing all of the good games of the past and comparing them to the bad games of today. And yes, the good games of the past are obviously better versus comparing them to the good games of today, right? It's like Baldur's Gate 3 is a really good game. I played it on stream. So if you're comparing Baldur's Gate 3 to like Final Fantasy 9 or Baldur's Gate 2, it's like, which one's better? Is Final Fantasy IX better? No, I wouldn't say that. I think they're both good. And they're both good in different ways. They're both fun to play is the main thing. So I think people used to have the experience. People are remembering this experience where you go buy a game and you could almost always expect that that game was going to be fun. You can't do that now. I can't look at a game and be like, I can reasonably expect that game to be fun. It's like I can reasonably expect the game to look good based on the videos I saw. I can't expect it to be fun. And a lot of times I get in and I play a game and it's just not very fun. You know, but you can go back and I can find an action game that's similar to Devil May Cry for the PS2 I've never played before. You go play it. That's fun. Right? It's like, have you played God of War 2? No. And you go play it and you're like, well, this game's really fun. It's a lot more fun than new God of War. Same series. Maybe you haven't played God of War 2. Go play it and see if it's good. I think it's better than the new God of Wars. It's more fun. More style. Yeah, the graphics are not as good. And that's part of it. But, you know, there were more... It was a different mental space that people existed in. And it took fewer people to make a game so you could have a lot more crazy ideas. And some of them could even not work in a game and it was okay. The threads of prophecy have been severed. Yes. Reload a save. Might be kind of vague, but what are some good storytelling ideas for a desolate world besides the obvious books or notes? Well, I mean, if there's people in it, you can talk to them. If there's no one in it, if it's like an empty world, how do you explore the past? Use the codex that we talked about in Dragon Age Origins. So, you could put objects, and you click the object, and the object brings up a little dialog box. Like, you pick up the severed head of a doll. Its eyes lull about, and you have a vague memory of a child playing like this. They did this with Dragon Age Origins, but they also did this with Jedi Fallen Order. Is that the one? The first one. You'd find these echoes, and it would tell you a little bit of the story without give you some exposition without you having to do a big cutscene. That worked pretty good. So I would probably do codexes. Oh, you found this object, and then there's a little write-up on the object. Versus doing only books and notes and things like that. I think once the death cult found out how much money could be made from video games, that's when their poison got to the industry. I would say it's not a money thing. I don't think they care as much about money. I think they care about their ideology. So I think it's more that they found out how many people are playing them and how many young people are playing them, and it's like, we have to get our ideology into these games because there's so many young people playing them. That's why. I don't think it's money. They were rewarding companies with money to do things that would harm them financially otherwise. The problem with a lot of newer games is that they're designed for the mass market, and designers assume the general audience is too dumb to learn. I think that's true as well, and I don't think it works out that well, because the mass market, it turns out, may not be interested in God of War. I could be wrong though, but I think it's like pop music. Yeah, it's a little bit. It's an attempt to catch everybody, and by catching everybody, you don't really catch anybody. It's not you don't offend anybody, but you don't please anybody either. I think it's one of those. I think you should stream Legend of Dragoon at some point. I remember liking that much more than Final Fantasy VII. Yeah, Legend of Dragoon is cool. For sure. There's a bunch of good old RPGs from the PS1, really the SNES, through the PS2 era. There's lots of forgotten JRPGs that are really good. Naughty Dog literally said fun isn't allowed in the game design philosophy because it's shallow. Their games aren't fun. I'm actually playing the sequel Jedi Survivor right now. It has the same thing. Cool. The little echoes that kind of give you a little bit more exposition. Fun idea. Good idea, I think. Why is the world desolate? That's the question. Yeah, that's a good question. You can answer that maybe with those codex entries. They don't need to worry about money because they're part of companies too big to fail. They can get a bailout from the government and keep producing crap. Already took note of the codex idea. It was a good one. Thanks. All right, awesome. Yeah, I think that would be a fun, to me, if you have an exploration bit. Imagine if Breath of the Wild had that. I probably would have liked it a lot more. Like if you click something and it's like, this is the ruin of the church, and you have a vague, and because Link can't remember a lot, it's like you have a vague memory of a ruin of a church. Like that could have been awesome. But instead, it was just a big empty world. Do you think the popularity of video games over other forms of media today could be due to a mental coping mechanism? Video games can provide an illusion of control and achievement. Well, that's a great question. I believe there might be an element of that based on some psychological research, which I can't pull up because it's in the past and I read it forever ago. That basically it gives you a sense of achievement, and that's why it's appealing to males who are largely disenfranchised from our current society. Males don't have a lot of control over themselves, their environment, and their careers, and that going to a game gives you that sense of accomplishment without actually giving it to you, right? And that can be a problem. This is one of those surrogate activities, like what the Unabomber talked about. Ted Kaczynski wrote this in his manifesto, called weightlifting a surrogate activity. And you have to think about it the way that he's framing it. What is a surrogate activity? Well, it's something you do to avoid doing the real thing, right? You lift weights to look a certain way rather than to do something with your body, right? You look like somebody who could kill a lion, but you're not killing lions. It's like guys who go out and, train tactical firearm stuff. What are you using that for? It's for fun. Well, you should be overthrowing the government with it, right? Like, you should be fighting a war with that, right? Basketball is a surrogate activity. All this athleticism. Yeah, but what are you using that athleticism for? Are you mastering your environment with it? No, you're entertaining people with it. You're not fighting wars with it. You're not conquering foreign lands. It's something to stop you from doing things that are against the system and the rulers. And I think video games fit into that category. But I've said before, it's all about how you approach video games, whether they are that. Same thing with books. If you spend all your time reading books, they can be a surrogate activity, right? Reading a bunch of fiction books is not a substitute for living life, right? Reading a romance novel is not a substitute for having a romance. So get out there and meet some girls, guys. You know, dating sims are not dating. They're just a fun thing to pass the time. So yeah, I think there's an element of truth to that. But I can't say definitively because we haven't studied it a whole lot. And it's not very popular to study men's issues right now. You know what I mean? And it's mostly men who play games. And I think we might be onto something with the accomplishment part. And they could be interested in it, you know. So I think the popularity of it has a lot to do with how that makes us feel. If you can get Grand Marshal, that feels really good. Like getting Grand Marshal is a huge accomplishment in old World of Warcraft. I never got Grand Marshal. I guess because I had college degrees and I gigged 4 nights a week. I had other accomplishments that I could lean on. So if you're doing them, so like anything, right? What is the difference between delinquency and leisure? Like, what's the difference between? No. Let me frame it like this. What is the difference between laziness and leisure? Well, laziness is you avoiding something that you have an obligation to do. It's being delinquent. If you don't do the dishes, it could be because you're lazy because you need to do the dishes in order to keep your house sanitary and things like that, and to have dishes to eat on. That's laziness. Whereas leisure is maybe you've already done the dishes, you're doing something active for yourself. You're studying philosophy, or you're practicing guitar, or you're reading a book. Leisure is different from entertainment in the classical sense. Leisure would be like studying Aristotle or learning Latin. That would be leisure. Reading books on economics. Education would be leisure. Whereas like going to the Colosseum would be entertainment. But you can go to the Colosseum as long as you're not going to the Colosseum and therefore avoiding the work that you need to do to live. Or that you owe somebody money and you're not giving them the money and instead you're spending it on cocaine or something, right? That is a vice. So video games can be part of leisure or entertainment activities, and that's fine. As long as you're not doing them instead of doing things that are better for you and the things that you're obligated to do, they're fine. I'm not a believer in the live to work thing. You know, like you should always be working your ass off all the time. Now, I say that I work my ass off all the time, but that's not why I think I do it, because I have to. It's really more of a leisure activity for me to write books. Really, I mean, we're getting down to it. But yeah, if you're working and you're paying your bills and you're saving, yeah, you can watch Game of Thrones and watch a show, play a game, read books, whatever. You're not lazy for doing those things. You're not doing those things in the absence of another accomplishment if you're doing them for fun and you're doing the things that you're obligated to do. I think that's a boomer thing. Like their kids are playing video games instead of doing things they're supposed to do. Quiet. I'm trying to watch my show. I can't hear the dialogue. You know. Anyway, that's my whole thing. Bad Player says it's a matter of engagement. I prefer to play games where gameplay is the reward. Yes, I feel that way as well. It's a shame Breath of the Wild didn't have more of that. It was the most you got was areas like the abandoned archery site. You got a little bit of that, and there were some rewards for exploring, but most of the time you were punished because you would encounter little bot goblins and you'd have to fight them, and your weapons would shatter like glass every 5 seconds, and you'd have to pick up different weapons, and they might be worse weapons, and then your only reward out of the chest was something that another rusty sword or whatever. It's just, eventually you realize that gameplay loop is self-defeating, and so you just avoid it. Oh, there's a bot goblin camp. Should I explore it and kill them? Nope. I'm going to walk around to see if I can find another little shrine, to do another little mini puzzle and get like another heart container or something, you know? There were too many shrines in Breath of the Wild. Games today just put quantity over quality. Over 100 shrines, but half of them are low effort. Yep. I like to excuse some of Breath of the Wild decisions for one reason. It was clearly meant to account and wanted to have many players have many different experiences. There still should have been more variety. There should have just been more depth. Having your weapons shatter and forcing you to use different weapons is not a substitute for depth. for depth. Depth would be the weapons are radically different when you use them. And therefore, or like a repair mechanic, like in Elder Scrolls, where you break or like in Fallout, break down the weapons you get to repair the weapons you have, and then work on making those really good. Wanted to thank you for Keys to Prolific Creativity. Well, thanks for reading. It helped me greatly improve as a writer. Probably the best book I've ever read. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you liked it, and glad you found it useful. I'm guilty of shirking my obligations. We all are. None of us are perfectly virtuous. We all have vice that we give into from time to time, right? We're not perfect people unless we've really like approaching the saint level of cultivation of virtue, which can take a lifetime. Okay, so it's okay. No big deal, man, right? Sometimes you just don't do that in the future. Do your best to not do it in the future and forgive yourself for doing it in the past. No big deal, right? Don't beat yourself up that you didn't fulfill an obligation once. Lots of people, that's probably the case for every person. I view like our morality. I kind of view there's 3 levels to it. There's like, or like bad behavior. Antisocial behavior is like directly against other people. Then there's like delinquent behavior, which is like indirectly against other people. It's like you don't pay your debt. You don't pay a bill. That's delinquent. You don't show up to a meeting you're supposed to show up to. That's delinquent. Versus stealing. They're all like different levels of sin. And people talk about like mortal versus venial sin. This is outside of that, but same idea. And then the third level, which is what no one talks about, which is like degenerate behavior. Behavior that mostly harms the self, but which harms others in a very indirect fashion by, say, like reducing the fitness of the group. This is a weird tangent to get on, but the point is most people, they feel guilty for doing those, delinquent things, but you can fix those, right? You can pay your debts. Same thing with degenerate things. It's like, oh, I ate too much. Okay, you can go on a diet, right? Oh, I smoked too much marijuana. Okay, you can reduce that or eliminate it. You can get help for that. Okay, you can reduce that third one. The antisocial one is where it's really obvious somebody's doing something bad, but then there's little things that we could improve on, right? That we can choose not to do. We can fix what we've done, and we can choose not to do it in the future. And we're usually not threatened with jail time for doing those things. Like, you're probably not going to get jailed for missing a bill. However, there may be consequences to you not paying that bill, so you should pay your debts, right? You pay your obligations, fulfill your obligations, or your social obligations, whatever they happen to be. Do you think people that crowdfund projects have the right to take as long as they want? Nope. Some of these people seem lazy to me. I agree. That's why I almost never contribute to any crowdfunding. It's why I don't really like crowdfunding. As a consumer, I intensely dislike it because of the lag. I want to buy a product. I want you to be able to complete it. I want it done, and I want to have it. I don't just want to be an angel investor and give you $5 or $20 to maybe never finish something. I think when you have real skin in the game, real risk of not recovering your money, you're more driven to complete a project. So Kickstarters, if the project's done, or I know that person's going to finish the project, and believe me, the people that I've had on the show and the people I promote, they fulfill their obligations in that regard. There's other people I can complain about. They take 2 years to finish a crowdfund. They crowdfund a comic. They spend 3 years writing a 10-page floppy or something. I can't stand that. I can't stand that kind of approach. That is laziness to me. You're not meeting your obligations, especially when other people write 30 pages of comics a month and publish them, right? You're not fulfilling your obligations at that point. But lots of people do fulfill their obligations with crowdfund, and I'm confident that they will. I bought into Winter Sun's last crowdfund because I'm completely confident Yari has all the things completed that he is actually selling. They are done, and he has samples of them. So they're going to come out. So I'll buy into that. Hasbro has their own crowdfund thing, and I pre-ordered the new version of Hero Quest 2 years before it came out. That was a long lag. I didn't really like that. But most crowdfunding places are pretty upfront. You're not guaranteed you're going to get anything. So I think they're shirking their obligations. They're maybe in that delinquent category by not delivering something, but they're not violating the spirit, which is you're making an investment, you may not get a return on it. That's all. So if I do a crowdfund, it's going to be, in fact, I'll probably do one for King Leper I'll tell you what my plan is for the King Leper crowdfund. I was like, I don't like crowdfunds. I don't like them as a creator, really. I really don't like them as a consumer. But I'll tell you what I'll do for that one, which is the book is done. So if you're one of my patrons, you have the first book of King Leper. You have it. The book is finished. All I'm doing now is I'm getting art squared away. What the crowdfund will probably pay for is just more art to be commissioned from Jesse White, who I've worked with in the past, and I'm really excited to work with on this book. So I'll just pay for him to have a cover. I'll pay for it out of my own pocket because I want to have the product that I want to have. And then whatever extra stuff we get from the crowdfund, we can pay him to do some internal ink drawings. I'd love to have stuff that's like the Conan book that I've talked about that has like lots of great ink drawings in the middle, illustrations, something that's really a classic fantasy book. But it's done, right? I don't want people to be like, oh, you're getting money to write a book. The book is written. It's finished. This is to fund the illustrations. And I know that this guy will deliver those illustrations because he's done it on a bunch of other crowdfunds. And no matter what, you'll be getting the book. So which route of the three houses did you prefer? I like Edelgard. So having done them, I got a criticism because I basically criticized the story a little bit. And people are like, you picked the worst route. I'm like, no, it turns out I think I picked probably the coolest route. I did Edelgard's and the church and then the Blue Lions. They're all cool, right? It's all good. I don't like that you have to do multiple playthroughs in order to understand everything that's going on in the story. Like the Ones Who Slither in the Dark kind of comes out of nowhere. It's just like I liked Edelgard's route. It's the shortest, but it's just like, yeah, dude, we're going to conquer everybody. We're going to kill everybody. And then I'm going to marry Edelgard. I'm going to make Byleth marry Edelgard, and they'll have crazy powerful babies that will rule the world. Perfect ending. I think with weapons, it was more meant to try and make the player engage with the rest of the environment, like a rolling boulder off a cliff thing. But they didn't do that very well. I think you could do that without your weapons shattering like glass. It takes me out of it. But here's the main reason why weapons shattering like glass sucks. Okay, I'm fighting, my sword shatters like a piece of glass after hitting the thing 5 times. I have to stop the gameplay, go into the menus, find another one, equip it, hit a guy 8 times, the sword shatters like glass again. Stop what I'm doing, eat some food, find another sword. So you're menuing. You're having to open your menu like multiple times every encounter. That's really annoying. I don't have to do that even in Elder Scrolls games. You don't have to do that much menuing. You'd have to do a lot of menuing in Morrowind, but it's like right click the spell, right click, press C, and the spell goes, or press R and then boom, you're going. Versus Oblivion, like you can just quick key everything. Number 4, fireball, and you can just be switching it out. It doesn't take you out of the combat. But with Breath of the Wild, you're constantly menuing. It just drove me nuts. The menuing bothered me a lot more than the shattering weapons. It's just the shattering weapons caused me to stop what I was doing. Stop this encounter, find another weapon, and then you're out of weapons. Oh, you have to look around and pick up a spear and figure out how to use that. That's cool, I guess. But like the menuing. Ugh. I'm tired of games forcing gameplay on me. If I want to try a new weapon, I will. Stop basically holding me at gunpoint to play the game how you want it. That's why I love Elder Scrolls. Is like, even in the intro level, it's like, here's all these weapons. Pick which one you think is cool. Try them out. Don't. Here's some spells. Try them out. Do whatever you want. Pick some locks. All the tutorials will have you doing like everything, except for Morrowind, which basically asks you to decide at the beginning of the game. But all the others don't ask you to decide. You can just try it out and then pick which one you like. Oh, I really like shooting arrows at this bear. That was fun. So I'm going to keep doing that. Man, modded Skyrim still looks amazing, doesn't it? I like modded Skyrim, and I played it on my computer, and I was like, this game looks like it was made this year. This game looks amazing. Yeah, if only there was a gamepad that you could use while playing the game and drag new weapons to Link's hands instead of stopping the game. If only it was... Well, in the Wii U version, you can't do that. Like, in the Wii U version of Wind Waker, you can drag the weapons on the gamepad. But in the Wii U version of Breath of the Wild, which I have it on the Wii U. I played it on the Wii U because I couldn't get a Switch at that time. I was like, we'll just play it on the Wii U. I like the Wii U version. You couldn't do that. You either were on the TV or you were on the gamepad. You didn't have a menu on the gamepad. It really was unfortunate, but it's just how it was, man. You just had to menu so much menuing. All right, I'm starting to run out of time. I'm getting close to 2 hours, so I'm going to call it here. Let me link everything for you guys. So Patreon, if you're on Patreon, you will have access to several books, actually. There's actually like 3 books you can download for free right now, 3 or 4. Same thing, I think you don't have access to the Leper King one on Ko-Fi. I'm trying to find a way that I can make that integration work easily, but I haven't figured it out yet. So there's a little bit of lag going on with that one. Of course, you can check out my Substack where I post articles and the transcripts of all the stuff that we write live. You get to read for free. Yeah. Honestly, I'm sort of regretting getting into modded Skyrim because there's like 20 different game mechanics I added, and I forgot how they work. Well, I pretty much just do graphics mods. I don't do a lot of gameplay mods. I'm gonna link the music channel if you want some cool ambient background music. I'm hearing it right now. Yeah, shame that's how they did that. No doubt Breath of the Wild was pushed to Switch so they didn't have to put that feature in for Wii U. It was right there. But you're right, that once they decided it was going to be a flagship title for the Switch, that feature probably had to go. It's alright. Okay, so this has been a great stream. I loved what you guys have had to say. I respect all your opinions, even if you are wrong about not liking Oblivion. It's okay to not like Oblivion's leveling system. I love it, personally. I think it's good. But it's okay. Everybody can like different stuff. And yeah, hopefully that covers a lot of the topics about how to do stories in games and the fact that you need to approach stories a little bit different with games than you do with a book. It's not about pacing all the revelations. It's about how the character interacts with the story, what they find out by talking to NPCs, and what you reveal with cutscenes as far as how you do your narrative. It'll be a different experience than with a book. And in some cases, you don't want to have the story be really oppressive because there's emergent story with things like MMOs and tabletop RPGs. So have a great one, and I will see you all next time.